Well, thank you for inviting me here. So we're not going to talk all about herring and salmon. We'll talk a little bit about airplanes. But I'm going to talk a little bit about history and how I got into aviation too, which is kind of interesting to me. So my professional background is in fisheries science. I worked over 40 years for the Lummi Tribe, doing various field projects in and around Whatcom County. So I'm going to use my cheat sheet, just stay on track. But if you have any questions anytime, just chime in. So I want to keep it kind of informal. So I've been retired since 2018, but still do volunteer work like the studies I did with Lummi. Okay, so how did I get into flying? In 1980 and 1981, I participated in a radio tag study by the Nooksack Tribe using adult Chinook salmon in the Nooksack River. I monitored the radio receiver in the back seat of a Cessna 172. I made about 25 flights each year, after which I was hooked on flying. I soloed during the second year of the study in July of 21st. I didn't do a lot of flying due to the cost of rentals, even though it was only about $25 an hour for a wet 172. For many years, I'd fly only about 12 hours a year. And so, Chip and Rochelle probably remember back Cascade, took several lessons from Rochelle and Chip, and they've been helpful in doing my biennial sense. Okay. So, this is the aircraft. That all changed after I completed my Experimental Vans RV9A in 2012. It has flown over 1,200 hours. This is the aircraft I use for these surveys. So here I am, quite a bit younger. This is my first trip to Vans Aircraft to pick up the tail kit. And just a bunch of aluminum and bag full of rivets, and doesn't look like much. Here's somebody else that you might have known. This is Devin. So he helped me rivet the starboard elevator in my single car garage. Moving on to the fuselage kit.
Just a question. How many hours?
Question. 10 years.
But how many hours?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't want to know. So this is the fuselage kit, and my partner Zapote sitting in the canoe.
Is that a kitchen?
That's the single car garage with my dryer in the back. Eventually I ended up moving to the airport, right? And so few more pieces to put on. I had a party where I celebrated putting the wings on, called a wings on party. Do you remember that? Some of you might have come to that. So there I am after the completion of my first flight, June 19th, 2012, and Al Snowy was generous enough to loan me his parachute and helmet for that and the next 10 flights. But yeah. And Mr. Cole here, I think, took this picture.
That's my picture.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go up here. So anyway, the specifications, here's, this is the non-aerobatic model of Vans aircraft. All the others are aerobatic, but the 9A is not, and 9 and 9A are not. My plane has 160 horse 0320 with about 350 hours after a rebuild from Avian Aero 2 years ago. It's normally aspirated. Fixed Sensenich propeller, one light speed electronic ignition, one magneto on the other side. And I have Dynon, EFIS, and engine monitoring systems, and the 2-axis autopilot. Stratus EGS in and out, Garmin 496 on the panel, and an iPad for ADS-B and navigation. Performance, so at 9,000 feet, I can get 7 gallons per hour at about 75% or 2350 RPM. And I make about 135 knots.
How many seats?
Two seats side by side. Yeah. Okay. So this is my VFR panel. Let's see here. If I look real careful, I think I'm at 11,200 feet, and I'm making 182 knots with the tailwind. And I think I'm on my way to Oshkosh. I don't know what I'm doing that high, but maybe going over the Cascades. It was a long time ago.
Over the mountains.
But anyway, some of the old, some of the new. Not a lot of room left, you know. Looks pretty cluttered, but I learned on analog and steam gauges, and I prefer to use the you know, the round gauges for airspeed, and I think for vertical speed that can have an advantage too. You know, if you're in a situation where you have engine out and you want to see, you know, if your best glide is good or not. So anyway, this is the completed project at East Stewart. So many of you have probably been in there, but it's one of my favorite places. So now we'll get into some of the survey work. So let's see here. This is kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing, I guess. Starting in about 1980s, we've seen a decline of coho, chinook, and steelhead in Puget Sound and Straits of Georgia. And it's no surprise to anybody, but you know, this is the big driver why, you know, people spend their careers in fisheries and trying to figure out why this is and how to correct it. Let's see. Related to that was some work I did in the South Fork Nooksack using beach seines to capture small juvenile Chinook. And this is a very interesting study that would probably take another slideshow to talk about. But we would capture these small Chinook, and this is what a yearling Chinook looks like. A zero-age Chinook was probably half that size. So what we did is we captured these small Chinook. We took them to the hatchery, and from there they were raised in the hatchery until they matured. And those eggs were taken from the females, the milk was taken from the males, they were stirred in a bucket, and then the progeny were let go. And as a result of that program, we've got now a real healthy run of spring Chinook coming back to the Nooksack River. So let's see if I forgot anything. So I was involved in a Chinook restoration program in 2007 where we captured juveniles with a beach seine. This is part of a large effort by the tribes, the state of Washington, state Fish and Wildlife, and federal agencies. Over a 5-year period, we captured and transported over 20,000 Chinook. So again, this is a yearling Chinook. So let's see here. A yearling means it stays a year in fresh water before it goes to sea. Only maybe 5% of the entire run in any one year are yearling Chinook. They're usually zero-age Chinook, meaning they leave the same year that they're hatched out. And they're usually about half that size. But this is just such a nice example of a Chinook, nice bright colors. You see these par marks here along here, those vertical bars are called par marks. And so between distinguishing the difference between different species is sometimes very difficult, especially between Chinook and coho. And one of the best characteristics for distinguishing those is this adipose fin. And this is a really good picture because it shows a clear window of that adipose fin. There's a darkened margin all the way around, but there's a window right through there. And so if you ever see that, you know it's a Chinook. The coho has a kind of a dusky or gray uniform adipose fin. And also the shape of the anal fin is a good characteristic. So in the Chinook it's really squared off, and in the coho it's more sickle shaped. But I just like this picture because it just seems like it's a good photograph of a Chinook.
He looks happy.
Yeah. He's probably just out of the solution there where we put him to sleep with. He's kind of dazed, you know.
Is this out at the aquaculture?
What's that?
Or is this out in the Lummi aquaculture?
Oh, no. This is in the South Fork Nooksack, up near Acme. In fact, this is a picture that shows the Acme Valley right down here. And this is the Skookum Tribal Hatchery. on Skookum Creek, which comes down here and then enters the South Fork. So this is where all the fish initially went to, is the Skookum hatchery. And so an interesting side story, I guess I'll tell it. So these 20,000 fish all had to go to the hatchery, and then they had to be taken individually and put in little compartments, or little, what we call their condo. And so we could take a DNA tissue sample down to Olympia and have them examine that to see if they were a native stock or whether they were a hatchery fall stock or another stock. So it's one of three combinations. So anyway, we would wait a week until the results came back from that DNA test, and then we'd identify those that were native South Fork Chinook. So those were the fish that were used in this program, and the other two stocks were returned to the river. So there was a process of determining the purity of the fish that we caught in order to be able to rebuild that run.
Now, what tribe runs this fish hatchery?
The Lummi Tribe.
So this is the Lummi. Okay. Gotcha.
But the whole effort was a Lummi Nooksack effort, and state fisheries did. So after the fish grew, they were taken to the Kendall hatchery, and then also down to Manchester, which is a saltwater facility, a federal hatchery. So there's a lot of federal involvement too. So the state fish did the DNA work, and it was quite expensive. Every sample is $100.
What fork has a stronger run? You know, because you've got the tribal hatchery on the South Fork, you've got the state hatchery on the North Fork.
Yep.
But is there a difference between, you know, the strength of the run from the North?
Yeah, it's a complicated story, but right now it appears that the South Fork run is quite a bit stronger than the North Fork.
Okay. Is that environmental, or is that?
Probably. So why did they spend so much money on this population? It's because the South Fork is the non-glacial fork, right? So it runs really clear and really hot in the summer, which means that these fish are adapted to a really warm environment. So I think the federal people that said, boy, we want to protect that stock because it may have some genetics that are important in the future with climate change and so on. So yeah, I think there's some unique differences in the forks and you know, the habitat and where the habitat is in terms of its recovery.
Yeah, I grew up on a fish hatchery, so it's just, you know, fish hatchery living right there.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a smolts released since about 2018, about 1 million or more. Have been released from the Skookum hatchery. And these are the fish that had matured. The mature adults were taken back to the tribal hatchery, back to Skookum Creek. Those fish were spawned. Those eggs were put in incubators. Those eggs were incubated over winter, and when they hatched out as fry, they were released to the South Fork at the hatchery. So it's a complicated story, but anyway. Let's see. Okay, so this is why we do the work we do. This is the first fish ceremony at Lummi, which honors the first salmon caught in the spring. Now, this is a community event that's I would encourage anybody to go to. Anybody can. It's open to the public, and it's usually in May, or sometimes, usually in May. And so in the ways of the tribes, the tradition is to capture the first fish, and it's usually a spring Chinook, and that is shared with the entire community. So one fish is actually divided up in little tiny portions, and everybody gets a bite of that. And sometimes you get a bone, sometimes you don't, you know, but if you get a bone, those bones are all collected, and then the tribal students go down to the river and put them back in the river. So there's a whole ceremony around this, and it's just a wonderful event. And this broodstock program is kind of responsible for this ceremony, because now they have a very limited, what they call a ceremonial and subsistence fishery. It's a lottery kind of thing where different families can get a lottery and go fishing for a day in May, and they might get a fish or two for their families. So it's not a big fishery, but it's an important fishery because it's the first fish ceremony. and this is another project I'm involved in. This is kind of off topic, but actually it's not, because I designed this float system. Oops. So this float system was fabricated here in Bellingham, and I designed it. This device here is a cone that is a patented design. I didn't design that, but I mounted it to this frame, this 22-foot aluminum pontoon structure, and I learned a little bit about aluminum and welding, and I didn't do any welding, but I learned what the welders had to do to put this together. But then what this does is it samples, it captures small salmon coming down the river. So these are smolts or juveniles coming down the river, and when this is operating, this is lowered down into the water, so that the water line would be right here. And half of this cone would be open to the upstream, and there's veins inside this cone that turn, that cause it to rotate. And as it rotates, it kind of pushes any fish that enter the cone back into the live box. Mm-hmm. And then there's also a trash rack in the live box. So, you know, when the river's flowing good and it gets murky and there's all kinds of trash coming down the river, that's when I have our highest catches, unfortunately. So there's constant, trying to get the trash out of the live box and getting the logs out of the trap, and it's a nightmare of a project to run. But so if you go down to Hovander Park, you'll see this thing in the spring, and when it's operating, it's towed out to the middle of the river out here in the fastest water called the Thalweg, and we operate it 24/7. So you might have the midnight to 6 in the morning shift, you know, and you might be out there and there's ice on the deck, and there might be logs coming down the river, and you might have a log get stuck in this cone. You might have to cut it out with a chainsaw. So it's pretty arduous work. But the reason why we do this, though, is the whole purpose is to measure the total production of smolts out of the river. So this is a total production, all species of salmon. You know, it's a big effort, but it's an important number to know. And so the better the habitat, the better the ratio of the fish leaving to the fish going up and spawning. So if you have those two numbers, Wayne, you'd probably understand that. But if you have the total number of spawners, and you know that should result in so many fish coming downstream in the following spring. But then if you measure the numbers coming down in the following spring, then you know that actually the health of the watershed, how well the watershed can produce fish. So it's a big deal, and I was involved in that, and I think kind of got me involved with aluminum construction. So anyway, in 2020 and 2021, I repeated a radio tag study on the Nooksack, and let's see what slide this is here. So this is a project that was repeated again after I left, and the person who took my place actually conducted this study. And what they did is they took a radio and stuck it in the mouth of, I don't know, in this case that was surgically implanted into the muscle tissue, that's right. Right, it's somewhere in here. And they're anesthetizing the fish here just before they're going to do the surgery. And so these fish were caught in the lower river with a gill net, a tangle net, a soft gill net, and then they were put in live tanks, anesthetized. Radio tag was put in them. They put back into the water to recover, and then they were let go again. And so this is the setup. Here's Eleanor Hines with MRC helping me as an observer. So this is a radio receiver that actually records all of the different fish to go up the river. So we might have radio tagged in any one year maybe 80 fish. But every year, as we're flying weekly, there's more and more tags. So there might have only started out, there's only maybe a half a dozen that were tagged. So each one of those tags would show up in this receiver as a unique number, so we'd know what fish that was. And the interesting thing was that you could see the same fish over and over again, you know, as they moved their way up the river.
That was really cool.
here's the antenna that was attached to the strut of my plane, just temporarily with hose clamps, but it worked quite well. So here is the route. So I would fly the mouth of the river and around the forks, and then go up the river. And interesting thing, with the radio tagging, there's no radio reception in salt water. So it has to be fresh water. So, yeah, it's something, antenna weights it, or, yeah. So we would,
above the ground, Mike?
huh?
How high above the ground would you fly?
About 1,200 feet, 1,500 feet. So we'd fly up the river to Ferndale, up beyond. So we'd start seeing fish, appear. Oh, he's there, and then here, next week he's there, and then he's up here, But there's these unique places where they hold for a period of time, which they rest as they go upstream. So these fish come in maybe perhaps a month and a half or 2 months before they're going to spawn. And so that's the spring Chinook. Other Chinook just come in, a fall Chinook comes up right away. So the spring Chinook unique that way. So they come in the early summer, and as they work their way up, they decide, well, I'm going to go to the North Fork or I'm going to go to the South Fork. And so the way I flew this is I flew up the South Fork, past Acme. The Skookum hatchery is about here, or no, up here. And I kept flying up into Hamilton, up until there's a River Mile 30 barrier. And so at that place I turned around, came back down, then I went over to the Middle Fork, and there's a dam right there, so I flew down the Middle Fork, and then I flew up the North Fork up to a glacier, circled around and came down again. And so, it was really fascinating to see every week, these fish start moving and showing up at certain places, but eventually they would appear at one location, let's say their spawning grounds up in here, for a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, and then they would die, and then if the radio was still in the carcass, you'd see it goes downstream a ways. So once you saw that, you knew it spawned out. So
were there identification tags on the salmon so that if somebody caught it, if they were told to put it back in? Or
well, we tried to recover the well, yes, there's, I'm trying to remember what the external mark was, but there was a spaghetti tag or some, yeah.
Okay.
I think there was something that told people there was a radio inside.
You ever find one in a bear?
No, but I remember the first year, actually, yeah, the first year, we were circling around somebody's garage. I think it was right in here somewhere. Anyway, so that's that study.
Cross that one off the list.
And here's a picture of a holding Chinook. And I was doing snorkel surveys in the South Forks when this picture was taken. But it just shows how important a log jam structure is for holding fish, because there's all these back eddies that to provide an area that he can stay in, without exerting a lot of energy. In fact, I've even seen fish just kind of leaning up against a bunch of brush, so they don't have to swim. So these habitats are really important, and they're almost non-existent below Linden, unfortunately. So there's some new techniques called engineered log jams that people have employed in the South Fork and North Fork, but those kind of techniques should be employed, I think, in my opinion, in the lower river, because that's where it's really needed. Okay, so here's a shot of the North Fork going up to Maple Falls. Okay, so the next thing we would do is count reds from the air. And if you know what a salmon red is, it's a nest. It's a nest where the female lays the eggs. It's called a red. And the eggs are dug into the bottom of the stream by the female, and then they're fertilized by the male. And there's a pair. And the interesting thing is, when the female digs the she overturns the gravel, and so all the gravel appears as a bright patch against the other gravel that has algae on it. So this is highly visible in clear water. And here is a red, a single red, on a riffle. So the flow is this way.
So Mike, that's just one fish?
Pair.
Yeah, fair.
Or it could even be a couple of males and a female.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the ratio is like 1.2 or something,
All right.
or 2.2 per red.
So what's the scale on that? How big is it?
Okay, so that red would be the size of a very large coffee table. And Chinook have a unique size and shape. They're oval, whereas other species have different shapes and different sizes. Which is important because every other year, pink salmon spawn along with Chinook salmon. I'll show you a video of that here in a minute, I hope. So, let's see here. Oops. This is what I use to capture that. This is a GoPro camera here. It's mounted on a gimbal setup that goes up inside the inspection port on my left wing. And it just hangs there. And so it's looking straight down in this application so that when I bank, it's still looking straight down. And this technology is amazingly inexpensive these days. 20 years ago it would have been unheard of to have this technology so small and affordable, but with all the drones and all the other technology, it's really gotten to be affordable. So it's a GoPro Hero 5. So in this situation, I would start the camera before I took my flight, and then I would just go ahead and fly over the river, and my route would be right here. I'd fly through Wickersham, through the canyon there, and then go downstream from about where the hatchery is in the South Fork. And it was only the South Fork I flew really that was clear enough to see those reds. The North Fork and the Middle Fork are turbid, due to glacial melt, so you would never see reds. And except for occasionally in the fall, things will freeze up and you'll get 1 or 2 days of clear water. And I have seen reds on the main stem,
Using that camera, what was your success rate in getting everything to work? And these GoPros are notoriously finicky. Did you ever get up and like, oh man, it's not working, I gotta land, go back there and monkey with it?
No, it's been pretty dependable.
Okay.
The batteries are sometimes limiting. You have to replace those from time to time. But it's been pretty reliable. You're never going to be able to cover the river 100%.
Sure.
So there's always going to be some also shading. You won't see all the river. Even if you did get right over it, you wouldn't see all the river. But what you can do is review that after the flight. And so you can make a judgment call, how much of the river can I see, and then make some estimates of the total reds or something like that. So, but yeah, I would never know how many reds I saw while I'm taking my flight,
Yeah.
But the camera records that.
Probably good.
Yeah, that is good. So here is an example of, if you know Strand Road, if anybody knows where that is, Strand Road. Here is downstream, and here's a cluster here.
Yep.
Here's a cluster about 12 or 50, and here's a huge cluster.
Oh, yeah.
And this was taken during a pink year, so there's actually small reds and big reds kind of combined. I think there's some of these that are just patches. You really can't distinguish what it is, and that's typical of a pink, is to be in an area that's they're so concentrated that they just chew up all the gravel and you really can't distinguish all the reds. So that's a confounding factor. Every other year you got to deal with that. So anyway, I think that's a good photograph. So I
see a lot of woody debris there.
well, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
But that's a South Fork,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of wood debris. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to, before I move on, can you show me that video? Can we do that?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know how I'm doing for time.
Is it the video with the... Well, I'm gonna just put it up.
It's called Red, something red.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me just bring this down.
And I'll turn this off again. Oop.
Okay, I don't know how to get that down. I have it here.
It's
put it up.
It's one of those files that's in the folder.
Yeah, I know, but I can't get it to play up there. Hang on a second.
Oh, well, we could show it later.
No, it's okay, I'm getting it. I think. Let's see. I mean, I have it right here.
Okay,
Yeah, but it's not up there.
we've got to display it somehow, yeah.
What happens then? Can you exit that out?
Yeah, I'm trying, sorry.
You know, maybe we can try to do it at the end of the show.
Sure.
It'd be fine to do it then. Yeah.
We'll do that.
Okay, so now let's talk about herring.
So that's how I met Mike, was herring.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I can't get this to advance. Why is that? Okay. So again, I used the GoPro camera. Here you're looking for two things. You're looking for patches of white water, which would indicate the herring spawning along the shoreline. In the life history of the herring when it's spawning is such that the females come in and spawn along the shoreline on the seaweeds, and they lay their sticky eggs on the seaweed. And then the males come in later and broadcast their milt along the shoreline. So the milt is the indicator of spawning in progress. But you can also see flocks of diving ducks, which indicates spawning has occurred sometime before that. So this is what herring looks like. And this was taken near Cherry Point, south of Cherry Point. And this is several egg layers thick. Individual egg is about 1 millimeter in diameter. They're opaque. You can see when they're developing, you can actually see their tails and their eyes as they mature. And this is a different kind of seaweed. This is sargassum. And you see it on eelgrass. They'll spawn on anything. They'll spawn on pilings, you know. Yeah. In San Francisco, I hear. And let's see. So anyway, that's what it looks like. And so the state has a boat crew, field crew that goes out. Every 400 yards, they will go along the shoreline with a skiff, and they'll throw a rake out, and they'll grab this seaweed, and then they'll find, the patch of spawn as a result. And this is called, I think, heavy spawn. There's light, very light, and heavy, several egg layers thick. So this is a good, solid spawn situation. So that was taken right there. So here is my route. Typically I would fly, this isn't really, so typically I'd fly down to Portage, up along Cherry Point, up into Birch Bay, up into Drayton Harbor, over to Point Roberts, back again, and then when I'm doing San Juan County, I do East Sound, West Sound, Blind Bay, Westcott Bay, Mud Bay, another bay that I don't know the name of, and then
Shoal
back.
Bay.
Huh?
Shoal Bay.
Shoal Bay, maybe? Okay. Shoal Bay, and then back to Bellingham. And sometimes I'll go get some fuel in Anacortes, and there's a couple areas that I check, Samish Bay and back. But so Tuesday, this week, Tuesday, I went up in here, didn't see anything at Portage. Well, I saw a few birds at Portage, went on up, didn't see anything, nothing. I get here, and what do I see? I see a large flock of diving, circling ducks and gulls. So I know they're chomping on something, but it's so turbid. The water is so turbid, I don't see anything else. And so when I go out to Point Roberts, nothing there, and I actually went and saw East Sound, some of these other places, and came home. So the GoPro batteries usually in the winter are limiting. I might lose my battery and lose my GoPro about here. But actually I bought some new batteries and I was able to complete the entire flight and worked fine. So it was an 1.5-hour flight. I had battery strength for that. In this In this situation, I don't use the gimbal. I just put the GoPro camera looking obliquely, 45-degree angle, forward of the wing. And so anyway, Tuesday, I did this flight, and I came home, and I looked at the video afterwards, and I saw it takes an image every 5 seconds and the video. So you have both those things. So you can actually just send people the video or the image if you want to. So I was reviewing the video, and I saw some whitewater. I saw some spawn. And I don't know if I don't have a picture of it, but I reported that to the state surveyors, and so they're going to go check it out, So that's exactly what I wanted to be able to do, is to alert them that we have spawn in a particular area, because they weren't out there that day. They usually get out there maybe once every week or every 2 weeks. So anyway, next slide. So this is from the state, their image of the Cherry Point herring, and its extent of spawning was from Point Roberts historically to Portage Island and all around here. And it was almost as if Cherry Point was a bullseye, and that as the population declined, the spawning was concentrated more and more around Cherry Point. Whereas today, well, actually, last year was the first year that they didn't find any spawn. Cherry Point stock of herring was the largest stock of herring in the state at one time. And I remember in the 80s being out in here doing boat surveys, and the sky was so dark with scoters and diving ducks. It was just dark, and there was herring all over the place. You look in the water, and it was just dark with herring. You could smell the spawn, actually. You could see seals and even gray whales, and it was just a frenzy of activity, And, of course, the fishermen fishing on them, too, and making, thousands of dollars out of a 16-foot skiff, So it was really, really a profitable thing. And then it just gradually crashed, But populations of herring typically do, don't they, Wayne?
They sure do. Really patchy.
So that's just what happened. And so there's another population called the Semiano stock, which also is now increasing in population strength. And so we see spawn now down to Birch Point, actually Point Whitehorn, and I'm going to show you a picture of some spawn that I saw a few years ago that I think might be that stock, but it kind of falls in between the timing of the Cherry Point and the Semiano stock. So
Cherry Point has a distinctive time
yes,
of the year where they're doing that.
April, May.
And it's, you can distinguish them genetically. The fish. Yeah, like you can the salmon.
Yeah, very unique.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so also when the fish arrive from the ocean, they kind of congregate in this area around Alden Banks before they mature and peel off and spawn, And these spawn events last only hours, maybe 5 hours or less. So if you see one, you're pretty lucky. In fact, I do about 20 flights a year, and if I see spawn once or twice, that's good, So mostly what I'm looking for, I guess, is bird activity that would be a clue that, there's something going on there. And so here's at Point Whitehorn, and this is spawn. That's what it looks like.
Well, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you see the tide is moving it around. But here is Cherry Point right here. And you can maybe see the docks. The docks are right there. The BP, BP
What
dock.
year is that picture?
You'd ask me that.
When I first started, modeling it and stuff, there was just the one pier at BP, and they had to.
Oh no, this is a 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago.
They got both piers and stuff. Yeah.
So this is, I think it's, I don't know if it's Cherry Point stock. I thought it was, but
Yeah, right there. I think it probably is.
yeah.
Especially in that time of year.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know the date. I have it written down, but I don't have it here. Okay, so here's Birch Point, and a little dab there, and pretty bright, you know, and it's pretty small, so in contrast to the other one.
It's hard to communicate to people how many fish are there.
Well, tens of thousands of tons
Yes.
is how they used to measure it.
Yes.
Tens of thousands of tons.
It's quite a party.
Yeah. And if you look in the water, it's just black, you know, it's amazing. So this is Portage Island, Bellingham Bay side, Hills Pass side, and definitely something going on there. And East Sound Airport.
Yeah.
These little bays here. Okay. So anyway, if any of you see anything like that in the spring between January and May, or you can let me know, or you can let the state surveyors know, and I can give you a phone number for that. So anyway, okay. So here's the picture I took. And this was, I do have a date written down here. And we don't know if this is a cherry point stock or the Semiano stock. Well, the interesting thing about this picture was it wasn't taken with the GoPro at all. It was taken with my iPad. And the reason why is because I was changing my oil and I just went out to Cherry Point to warm up the oil. So I got lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a remarkable picture. In fact, that picture appears in that publication, the Cherry Point, what is it, Wayne? Management plan or something?
Yeah. And I know it looks large, but if you look at the
Okay,
historic,
March 18th, so that's pretty early. Yeah,
that's early.
and that was 2021.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, that's just about it. And so the reason why we're doing all this work, this is Devin. He's caught a Chinook, but it happens to be a hatchery Chinook, right? There's an adipose clip. So that could have been one of our software, although it was taken in Skagit Bay, was it?
Yes.
Anyway, well, that's all I have. So thank you.
Herring are great food for these. The thing is, when they're really little, going out to the ocean, they're preyed upon by herring. Herring, I mean, it's a very interesting food web out there. It's really cool.
Well, I think what they're finding in Chinook in their stomachs is that they don't have many herring, small herring. What they're finding is crab zoea, crab zoea, those little crab things, they don't provide as much caloric food for them as a herring would.
Yep.
So they have to eat more of those. And the other thing that they see is sand lance. And that's interesting to me because we know very little about sand lance or where they spawn.
That's right.
What are those?
Yeah. So there's surf smelt, sand lance, and herring. Those are the three forage fish species that salmon feed on.
The cool thing about herring is they live a lot longer than salmon. They come in multiple times to spawn. They have to be about 3 or 4 years old before they produced enough eggs to replace themselves. Because they make lots of eggs, and as the females are the rate limiting thing. The larger the female, the more eggs they produce. So they finally get large enough that they survive that long, so they actually have replacement.
Wow.
What's happened throughout much of Puget Sound is you don't get so many old fish anymore. They don't survive long enough.
Well, same is true with Chinook, too.
Chinook too, absolutely.
They're getting smaller and smaller.
That's right, smaller and younger, and a lot of the fish, they come back at different times, like this whole thing about they go out and they come back. It's very complicated, the life history strategies.
Yep.
So I do the math, and thank God for people like Mike who go out and count them. Yeah, it's just amazing and then now the DNA, you know, so much more than like when I first got here in the early 90s. We can really identify these things, but and of course that's the bottom of the food chain for the salmon. And of course, why don't we have so many resident orcas? Well, not so many salmon. So the math looks easy. We don't know how to fix it, I don't think.
The interesting thing with Chinook, I think historically, the average weight was maybe 40 pounds,
Yeah,
and now it's 12 or 14.
so, yeah.
And the problem is that we have, when the female digs her redd, the deeper she can dig it, the better it's protected from the high flow events in the winter. And so we've got a situation where small fish are digging shallow redds, and these redds are getting washed out, whereas maybe historically they were deep enough so that they could withstand the high flow events that we had. So it's got a lot of different ramifications.
We did some studies on the Yakima, the Nooksack, the Skagit, looking at temperature and salmon too. What's also happening, you can see it in the data, that the rivers and stuff will get warmer. And also the oxygen goes down. And so you've got a lot of things happening in these spawning areas. So it's one of the things I do. And Elmer, the person she actually worked on one of our salmon type things back down in the Poapler shed. And you look at the data, it's like, and we have really good data for these fish. I mean, and it's going to be a challenge to recover these species to the numbers.
But you know, when I feel really discouraged, I always remember that salmon are colonizers.
Absolutely.
After the glaciers, receded, they were the first things to go back into the river. So, when the conditions are right, they'll return and spawn. So
There's that story that you hear when you're a kid, because my kids went to school here. Oh, they always go back to the same river to spawn. No. There are some that just go somewhere else.
yeah, and it's a good thing.
Well documented, yeah. Yeah, that whole colonizing type thing. You don't colonize, you go back to the same river each time, the same spot. So they have, and different species do that somewhat differently. But it's really cool.
What's the difference between our Chinook and, say, Fraser River? I did a lot of fishing up there this
Yeah.
summer. And they're big fish up there, and there are a lot of them
Yeah.
returning back to the Fraser. So what are they doing differently on that river to...
Well, of course, the focus there is the sockeye.
Right.
But the Chinook, I don't know. There's differences. There's probably an average size difference. Probably larger fish, and the Fraser is a larger river. But they each species has their unique characteristic needs for spawning. In the case of the sockeye, they spawn in tributaries to lakes, so they have to have a lake in their system. So. The Fraser is unique that way. They have all these lakes, they have all these runs of sockeye.
So it's an interesting thing to think about 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when the runs were reasonably strong. You still had a lot of unmitigated environmental stuff. Think of logging and farming and all that stuff, right? Now we see that a lot of these landowners have become better stewards of the land, let's say. So you've got more restrictions on the logging and the farming and whatnot. But you still see the decline. Do you think it's more of a it reached that critical mass where the environment went too far and you just can't return? Because I know growing up on the fish hatchery, we pump out fish and all that. So, but then it got to be political. Listening to my dad talk about things with working for the Department of Fisheries. So, what in your opinion is the critical thing that we're facing right now between environmental and political and environmental and all that?
Well, unfortunately, it's a very complicated life history.
Yeah.
Think about it. The Chinook salmon, it goes out to sea. It does this big circular thing in the North Pacific, Every year, one circle, so maybe after 3 circles or 4 circles, it comes back in Puget Sound, goes up a river, it spawns. It's a canary in the coal mine. So if you can figure that out, but what I think in terms of the weight loss is partially the offshore fisheries in the mixed stock areas out in the ocean, these tangle nets that are miles long. they intercept a few, and they're supposed to throw them back, but, you know, they probably don't, you know.
So,
But
so you think it's out there in the ocean where we can't?
well, no, I just one of many, many factors. That's one. There's another problem with logging, as you mentioned, and it's fine sediment. So sediment particles get down into those redds, and they clog the oxygen circulation around the eggs. Okay, so geologists or fluvial geologists will talk about the pig and the python. What that is, it's a mass of sediment that's working its way down the river that might take a decade or two to get down to the bay. And it's real. You can see it over, if you do time-lapse photography, you can see where all this sediment is moving down the river. And you can look up on the hillside after a first snowfall, which you'll see all these logging roads, and there'll be these slashes.
Yes.
You can see
Picture
it.
that from Christmas.
And what that is it's sidecast of the logging road failing and sliding down. And logging road is one of the worst contributors of sediment. So these are bleeding. You know, these are continually bleeding into the river.
And that was a fascinating thing to think about. So when I was younger, I worked at like the Nacelle hatchery and the Nema hatchery and whatnot. And I remember seeing this photograph of the Nemo River where there were paddle wheelers in it, right? And it was like you could walk across it when I worked there. And it was just talked about, you know, the sediment filling in and stuff like that. So it's fascinating to think, you know, but what's it going to take to get these stocks back, you know? And then you go up to, I worked at a fish hatchery in Valdez, and we had more pink salmon than we knew we could do.
Right. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth investing in. You know, these engineered log jams that we hear about, in the South Fork, they have quite a few of them. And the reason why they want to put those in is they'll stay in place over many years. You know, they won't get washed out. But they'll dig a deep pool, you know, the scouring. And deeper you dig, you get into the groundwater, which is cool water. So that's going to cool the South Fork, you know, just by the fact of having these log jams there. And so that's an example of, you know, we can do. We can do things like that. We just need to do more of them if we can, or just be patient. Yeah.
I've heard, and would you confirm that the orcas live on only Chinook salmon?
No,
Not true.
but mostly they prefer Chinook, but they'll eat chum. They'll yeah.
The rest of it.
What's interesting though, I think, is they're social creatures, and they have such a social network that they only eat certain things. So the salmon eaters will not eat seals. The seal eaters will not eat salmon. They're taught by their tribe what to eat, and this is how we catch them, and this is what we eat, and this is what. And they're so, I don't know what's the term.
So it's some people call it culture.
Yeah,
I don't
culture.
know if it's, you don't write it down, but they
Wouldn't they
learn
be better off if they ate both?
Yes,
it-
in a way.
Or anything that's available?
Because when you have pinnipeds, it's sometimes these are the ones that go, the transient pods go all over. They'll come in, like I've been down at Newport. And
They're the salmon eaters, or the seal eaters, I'm
They'll
sorry.
come in and the water is bloody there, because they'll come in and eat the sea lions and stuff like that. But they travel long distances where these guys are hitting a whole different resource. And it's better in lots of ways to be specific as to your resource, because your strategies are different. And so
You get
on.
better at it. Yeah.
Also, the way they hunt's different too. Yeah. If you see the specials and you hear all the noise and stuff, well, they're pretty careful about when they use echolocation and when they don't, because it can give themselves away. So and this is true all over the world. You'll find these different subpopulations that have different strategies all over the world. Yeah, so to take a whale from one area and put it in, you know, and relocate it, but it's a different kind of whale there, how they hunt.
Can we show the other one?
Won't survive.
It won't survive. Yeah. The other thing I think it's hard for people to understand is if you actually calculate how many fish survive to reproduce, so like only a certain, like 5% as it goes up and will make a red, but of those fish that are produced in a red that make it back, it's a very, very small fraction.
luck-
Everything else eats them.
The lucky ones, yeah.
The lucky ones, absolutely.
So here's a video of, we're going north from Sandy Point.
Yeah. Well, this looks very familiar.
I call that the practice area.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you see the pier, the first refinery. So it's a little shaky, but this is basically what I'm looking for. And I'm probably about 1,200 feet.
Yeah.
And it's not the fisheye view, it's immediate, intermediate view. So you have 3 different views, I think, in the GoPro. The narrow view is more the real view. This is a little bit extended.
That's pretty cool.
There's always little seeps along the way.
It's amazing how many seeps there are into that area.
And you see it quite well after a rain.
Yeah.
So yeah, my survey of the San Juans and along Whatcom County takes about an hour and a half. If I just do Whatcom County, it's less than an hour.
Does the airplane fly any different when you have the cameras mounted or the
No.
radio antennas? Yeah.
A Cessna high wing would be a lot better in some ways than a low wing. But it is what it is. So here's my potential landing spots should I have an engine out, right? And early in the year I try to wear a safety vest that's inflatable.
Yeah.
And I look for any ships that might be around if I'm crossing from Point Roberts to Orcas. So there's certain things you can do to give yourself a little better edge. But I really very fortunate in my engine. I feel real comfortable with it.
I don't know if you see this, Mike, but when we do the GIS and the landscape, it's gotten a lot less wooded over the years. A lot more fields and stuff like that. A lot more open.
So here's an example of a seep.
Yeah.
It's kind of turbid, but it's not herring spawn. It looks similar, but it's not the same.
Define a seep.
Well, just runoff. Freshwater runoff.
And it could come from the surface or from going through the rocks and
There's a
stuff.
little ravine right there.
Yeah. That's really cool.
So I've given this, that's probably good.
Want to stop?
Yeah, I've given some of these tapes to the Whatcom County, their shoreline people, so that they can, look at different shoreline development or whatever. Okay, let's look at the other one. It has the reds in it. So this.
Cool.
Okay, this will make you dizzy.
What were you doing?
I'm turning around.
I thought this was non-aerobatic.
Okay, so we're going to see pretty soon. I apologize for the roughness of it, but it's going to have to go all the way around. Then you'll see a cluster of reds here in a bit. Oop. No, so that's Potter Road. That was Potter Road you just saw.
Turn it down.
What an all 360 sounds like.
Okay, here you stop it now. Stop it.
Better.
Stop it.
All right, sorry.
Well, can you go back?
Yes, I can.
Go back 10.
Yeah.
Ooh. Well, again.
I'll go
Okay. No, so this is this confluence, right? Here's the North Fork. You went ahead. So here's the railroad bridge and the other bridge. So this is the North Fork and here's South Fork. So go back 10 if you can. So this guy. Okay, good, perfect. So here's a cluster here. So here again, the GoPro mount is on the gimbal. So it's always trying to look down. Whereas the other flight and the herring flights don't have to mess with it.
A lot of busy fish.
Yeah. Okay.
Keep going.
That's cool.
Now, is your camera, is it just up in the inspection plate open, or do you have
Yeah, it's open.
Okay.
I've got a little wind deflector.
Yeah.
I've tried, plexiglass devices in front of it, but it just gets in the way. So I just have a wind deflector. Works fine.
The newer cameras, you can externally mount them on an inspection plate, and they have vibration nullifiers. So it'll basically, they call it rock steady. It takes out any vibration.
Yeah.
So it'll be like a Hollywood production.
Yeah, I'm sure they're getting better and better at doing that.
That's really cool.
So I only do a couple of these a year, but this was last September. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Cool. Go forward a little bit. No? Okay.
Yeah, that's
Back at BLI.
pretty much it.
Okay.